It was a scorching afternoon in downtown Los Angeles. On the side of a busy street, a pregnant street vendor named Hannah was arranging her cart of fried banana rolls and noodles. She was drenched in sweat, clearly exhausted, but her determination never wavered. Suddenly, the screech of tires broke the air, followed by a chorus of screams. A man had been hit. Hannah looked up. A man was sprawled on the asphalt in the middle of the road, bleeding, unconscious. Nobody moved. No one helped. People just stood there, watching. "Hey, somebody help!" Without hesitation, despite her condition, Hannah rushed toward the injured man. She took off her apron and pressed it against his bleeding head. "Sir, don't close your eyes," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Hold on, I'm going to take you to the hospital." Minutes later, Hannah was in the emergency room. She was out of breath, trembling, and pale. Suddenly, the sound of multiple screeching tires echoed outside the hospital. She froze. 8 black limousines pulled up, flanked by more than 20 bodyguards in black suits and earpieces. A sharp voice cut through the silence as a sharply dressed elderly man stepped out from the first car. "Where's my grandson?" he shouted. Everyone turned to look at Hannah, who clutched her belly instinctively, a shiver running down her spine. Who was that man I helped?" she whispered to herself. In a high-profile club in Las Vegas, the music pounded, lights flashing red, blue, and violet across the blackout-themed interior. The club was one of the most controversial and exclusive in the area, known not just for dancing and drinks, but for a fantasy-laced escape from reality. Behind the cashier's booth sat Hannah, wearing a long-sleeved black uniform and a waist pouch stuffed with receipts and bills. She was in her early 20s, pale, with almond-shaped eyes, a well-defined nose, and a dimple on her left cheek that appeared whenever she smiled. But beyond her physical beauty, it was the radiance of her personality that stood out. She was cheerful, polite, and fiercely resilient, despite fighting daily battles against a world that seemed determined to break her. "Hey!" called her co-worker Serena, while pouring iced tea into plastic cups. "You're seriously never going to consider dancing, not even once?" Hannah shook her head, typing on the cash register screen. "No, Rena, I'm good right here." "But girl, it's such a waste. Do you know how many customers ask me if you'll make a guest appearance? You're so pretty. Honestly, prettier than most of the featured dancers." Hannah smiled softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks, but I'm not made for the stage. I just want a decent and quiet job. I'm just a cashier. I don't want to be in situations I can't control." "But tips, girl. The other night someone handed a dancer 5 figures. One night just like that. Plus, she got pulled into the VIP lounge for a toast. If a big spender takes a liking to you, jackpot." Hannah looked out at the dance floor. Several women were performing, slowly peeling off glittering costumes. Men sitting up front held cash, slipping it into bras, garters, or the thin straps of lingerie. She shook her head. "You know me, Rena," she said softly. "No matter how broke I get, I could never sell my body." Serena didn't respond. The moment passed. Hannah suddenly felt parched. There was a grape juice box someone had left in the pantry. Looked familiar, like one of her favorites. She assumed it was just juice, so she took a sip while printing receipts. But something tasted off. Bitter. It burned her throat. Before she could complain, her head started to spin. Her body grew heavy. Movement slowed. Her stomach twisted in agony, as if something inside her had begun clawing its way out. "Han!" shouted the floor manager, storming over to her booth. "What's wrong with you? Are you drunk?" I just drank juice," she replied, struggling to stand, nearly toppling over. "Clock out. You can't work like that. You'll mess up the receipts." She nodded weakly, staggering out the club's back entrance. Outside, In the cool, pre-dawn air, she almost collapsed. But someone caught her, a tall man, deep, soulful eyes. He wore an expensive button-down shirt, slightly open at the chest. He reeked of alcohol, clearly drunk, but still steady. "Miss?" he asked gently. "Are you okay?" She couldn't answer. Confusion consumed her. The world darkened. The next morning, Hannah woke up in an unfamiliar room. White ceiling, soft mattress, thick duvet, and the chilling truth, she wasn't wearing anything. Her hands instinctively clutched the blanket to her chest. Panic, disbelief. Her throat was dry. She couldn't cry. Not yet. She heard water running from the bathroom. A man was inside. A man. She tried to remember. All she recalled was being caught by that stranger. Then nothing. Panicking, she got dressed, grabbed her phone, bag, and wallet. Whatever she could find. In her rush, her eyes caught on an ID lying on the bedside table. No time to process. She stuffed it into her pocket and fled. In the hotel hallway, she struggled to breathe, trying to convince herself. You didn't ask for this. You didn't want this. You didn't know. On the subway, she hugged her bag like a shield against the world. To the other passengers, she was just another tired woman. But inside her brewed a storm of shame, fear, and anger. As she got off the train, she pulled out the ID. Not hers. A photo of a strikingly handsome man in corporate attire. The name was unfamiliar, but the logo on the ID was well known. Wealthy, powerful, prestigious. She stared. "Damn," she muttered. "He's actually really good looking." A bitter smile crept onto her lips. "Well, at least I didn't lose out in that department." But her smirk quickly vanished when a voice behind her said, "Miss, are you getting on or just having a moment there?" Embarrassed, she stepped into the train, still burdened, still trembling. When Hannah arrived at her rented room in a cramped housing complex in East Oakland, she locked the door and slowly sat down on her old mattress. And that's when everything collapsed. She cried, quietly, no screaming, no theatrics, just the kind of crying that tears at your soul. What have I done? Why did I let this happen? She hugged her knees, trying to remember that night. Nothing came to her, not even the man's name. The only evidence she had was the ID clutched in her hand. She wanted to believe nothing happened, but she knew something had been taken, something erased, something that could never be returned. And no matter how handsome or rich the man was, one thing was certain. She didn't want it. She didn't choose it. And that night, in the silence of her small room, Hannah made a promise. Never again. I'll wait for the right man. Not just someone rich or handsome, but someone who knows how to respect. She kept working at the club. Clad in her black long-sleeve shirt and knee-length skirt, she looked simple. Her hair tied back, lips dabbed with balm, and a bit of powder to soak the sweat. Even though she looked pale and tired, she forced a smile. Rest wasn't a luxury she could afford. As she clocked in, her supervisor handed her the duty logbook with a narrow-eyed glance. "No OT last night, huh? Could have gotten a nice tip if you were a dancer." Hannah just smiled and walked toward the cashier booth. She didn't want to argue. In that club, women like her were seen the same way. If you weren't dancing, you were probably just pretending to be above it all. Everything has a price, some said. But Hannah was different. She fought to stay that way, even if she had no money, even if she walked home every night, even if her bus fare barely made it. She would still choose dignity over extra tips. That night was like any other. Drunk customers, regulars on the dance floor, eager men handing out tips. Hannah kept counting change, swiping cards, and handing out receipts like nothing had happened. But inside she was still carrying the wound of that night, the night she surrendered herself to a stranger. The next night, around 2 a.m., she was nearly clocking out, eating instant noodles near the booth when an older man approached. big belly, rings on every finger, obviously drunk. "Miss, cash out, please," he said, his eyes not on her face, but on her blouse's neckline. Hannah was used to this kind of customer. She completed the transaction, but the man didn't move. "You're even prettier up close," he slurred, his breath reeking of liquor. He reached for her hand. "Sir, your transaction is complete. Next customer, please," she said calmly, trying to step back. But the man didn't move. Instead, he leaned in closer. "Maybe you can join me later. Even if you're not a dancer, I just want someone with me. I'll pay you." "Extra." She stepped back. "Sir, please, I don't do that." He moved forward, trying to kiss her cheek. Hannah slapped him, hard. The music seemed to stop. Staff turned their heads. "Your staff is disrespectful," the man shouted, clutching his face. "She slapped a customer. Doesn't she know who I am?" Within seconds, the manager appeared. "Hannah, what did you do?" "He harassed me," she yelled, face flushed. "He touched me, tried to kiss me." "You should have let it go. He's a customer, a VIP, one of the biggest business owners in LA, the manager scolded. "I don't care if he's the president. He disrespected me," Hannah replied, her voice shaking. "I'm a cashier, not a dancer." The manager looked at her like she was the problem. "You should have just agreed. One night wouldn't kill you. Would have been a bonus." "Respect," Hannah snapped, tears pooling in her eyes. "Can't someone work here with dignity?" "Dignity?" The manager scoffed. "You're talking to me about principles? One of our staff saw you leave with a customer the other night." Hannah froze. Her world fell silent. She knew what night he meant. The night she was drunk. The night she couldn't remember. The night she woke up in a hotel bed, not her own. The night that still haunted her. "We're all the same here, Hannah," the manager continued. "So don't lecture me. If you can't follow the club's rules, you're fired." Hannah didn't argue. She said nothing. She took off her ID lanyard, handed it over, and turned around quietly. No tears in her eyes, no anger, just exhaustion. Outside, there were no taxis, no buses, no rides. She stood at the curb, covering her uniform with her jacket as the early morning wind swept through the street. It was cold, like a reminder from a world that didn't care anymore. She went straight to bed without changing or eating. She just wanted to sleep, but the tears always came first, before sleep. Days passed. She didn't leave the house, ate only when her neighbor's mum called her. Her wallet was nearly empty. The coins she had left were used to buy bread and instant coffee. But something felt off. Her head throbbed. She kept vomiting, even with an empty stomach. She thought it was stress, maybe food poisoning. But when she realized she hadn't had her period in 3 weeks, she paused. She sat by the small table, staring at the calendar. 1, 2, 3 weeks. She traced her last period, right before that night she didn't choose, the night that left her with shame, and now, a possibility. Number impossible, she whispered, but the vomiting, the dizziness, the breast soreness, the missed period, there was only one explanation. She was pregnant. The world flipped upside down. She touched her stomach. She felt nothing yet, but it already felt heavy, not from size but from the weight of responsibility. No warning, no apology, no certainty about where her life would go. She replayed the face of the man from the hotel, the man whose ID she still had, the man who'd been with her that night, tall, pale, deep eyes, handsome. "I didn't lose out," she'd once joked, but now the joke was a curse. One night, one mistake, a lifetime of consequences. "Oh, God," she whispered. Just then, the door creaked open. It was Miss Terry, her elderly neighbor. "What happened to you, child? You look pale like you haven't bathed. And—" Her eyes widened. She spotted the trash on the table, a pregnancy test with 2 lines. "You're pregnant." Hannah couldn't speak. She didn't know how. but her tears answered for her. Everything she'd held inside for days came crashing down. She cried, not out of shame, not out of anger, but from fear, from helplessness, from the overwhelming reality of being jobless, alone, and now carrying life inside her. 3 months had passed since Hannah's world completely changed. 3 months of doing laundry for neighbors in exchange for a few bucks. 3 months of silent tears at night, especially when she felt the kicks of the emptiness in her womb. In truth, not much time had passed, but 3 months of hardship felt like forever when she had nowhere else to turn. Because in the middle of all the fear and poverty, one thing was clear to Hannah. A child now depended on her. She sat quietly on a long plastic bench at a public health center in East LA, waiting for her first prenatal checkup. In her hand was a brown envelope filled with signed prescriptions, IDs, and documents from the local clinic. To her, the envelope was more than paper. It was a symbol of a new chapter. She was now a mother. She held her belly. It hurt. It was hard on the right side. Tight. She was nervous. "Please don't let me lose the baby," she whispered through restrained tears. She wasn't a mother yet in the full sense, but she already loved the child inside her. Every day of struggle, every sleepless night, every grain of leftover rice she ate, every product in the market she chose not to buy to save for tomorrow, she did all that for her baby. The OB/GYN waiting area was filled with other pregnant women. Almost all were accompanied by men, husbands carrying bags, holding drinks, wiping sweat from their wives' necks. One had her boyfriend guiding her to the restroom. Another was being fanned by her husband. Hannah sat quietly in the corner, holding back tears. She didn't envy them, but she felt the weight of being alone. That painful question kept creeping in. Who will help me? Who can I turn to? "Hannah DeRosa," the nurse called. She stood up immediately. Even though her belly hurt, she forced herself to walk into the doctor's office, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The OB/GYN was an older woman with a kind face. 3 months? She asked, while reviewing the chart. Hannah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you experiencing any pain?" Hannah nodded again. "A little, especially when I'm tired, and sometimes I feel nauseous all day even if I haven't eaten anything." The doctor's brow furrowed. "You have a high-risk pregnancy, Hannah. Based on my observation, there's a possibility of premature labor if the stress and exhaustion continue. You need to rest, avoid heavy lifting, long hours of work, and especially sleepless nights." Hannah's chest tightened. How could she rest when she didn't have a job? "I don't have a husband," she said weakly. "It's just me. I have to work." The doctor looked at her, compassion in her eyes. "There's government assistance, but please, take care of yourself. Getting pregnant without a support system is no joke." Hannah nodded, her hand still on her belly. But now there was a sharper reason behind the pain: fear. When she returned to her small unit in the scorching housing complex, the smell of burning plastic from the street and the sweat of playing children filled the air. "Hannah, how was your checkup?" asked Miss Terry from her front porch, soaking chicken in a basin. "They said it's sensitive. I can't get tired." "Oh dear," Miss Terry shook her head. "So what's your plan now?" "Miss Terry, do you know any job I could do in my condition? Something light? Anything really. I don't want to rely on handouts." Miss Terry stopped. "Child, in your condition, you can't just get any job. You're pregnant. That's hard. No company's gonna hire you." Hannah said nothing, but her face reflected quiet despair. And as if that answer weren't hard enough, neighbors began to gather. Some covered their mouths, staring at her belly. Others pretended to smoke while sneaking glances. "You still don't know who the baby's father is?" one neighbor asked with a hint of mockery. Hannah didn't respond. She just felt something lodge in her throat. In the complex, being pregnant and unmarried was enough to get you judged for life. Then, a loud volume blared from Miss Terry's TV inside. The news anchor's voice echoed clearly even outside. "Breaking news," the reporter said. Today, the new CEO of the Asiero Group of companies was officially introduced. The company is set to make a major acquisition of one of the country's largest airlines. The new head is none other than Mr. Julian Asiero, son of the late business mogul Ernesto Asiero. Hannah froze. She turned to the TV. She stood up. There he was. The man from the hotel. The man from the night she couldn't remember. The man whose name she never knew until now. Live on national television, standing, in a suit, holding a microphone, addressing the press. Her mouth dropped open. "It's him," she whispered. "No doubt. He's the father of my child." Miss Terry turned to her. "Hannah, are you okay?" She wiped her face quickly. "Oh, it's nothing. Just remembered something I have to do." But Miss Terry wasn't convinced. "Hannah, if the dad of that baby is just some good-for-nothing, don't bother chasing after him. Those types of men never bring good to your life. You'll just end up suffering more." Hannah looked at her and fought back tears. "Miss Terry, I don't plan to chase him. I don't want his love. But I do need a job. I need to survive. Not for me, but for this child." Miss Terry paused. She looked Hannah up and down, thin, pale. But in her eyes, she still saw fire, strength, a frail body, but a determined spirit. "All right then," Miss Terry said. "I was supposed to go out and sell my snacks today. Rice cakes, egg rolls, caramelized bananas. But it's too hot and my blood pressure's acting up. You sell them for me instead. I'll pay you a share, not the whole earnings, but if you want, you can add your own food too." Hannah teared up. "Miss Terry." She hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you. You're always so kind to me." From that day on, Hannah took to the streets every day with Miss Terry's food cart, selling banana fritters, caramelized bananas, and coconut stew. Sometimes she added her own cooked noodles or rice cakes. It wasn't easy. The sun was brutal. Her belly was heavy. The eyes that followed her weighed just as much. But every day she strengthened her resolve. For her child, for herself, for a future she refused to give up on. 5 months had passed since Hannah first started selling from Miss Terry's cart. Now she had her own pushcart. Old, made of steel and wood, rust forming along its edges. But for Hannah, it was a shop with a soul. That cart carried her hopes, her child's future, and the bravery of a mother who had no one to depend on but herself. Her due date was approaching fast. Her belly was huge. Bending over was almost impossible. Every step she took while pushing the cart down the crowded streets felt like a blade slicing into her side. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. "I need money for milk, for checkups, for rice. Who am I doing this for?" That was her constant reminder to herself. It was a scorching afternoon. The city burned beneath the unforgiving sun. The air reeked of asphalt, smoke, and reused cooking oil. Across from an old building on Maple Street, her cart was parked on the sidewalk beneath a worn-out umbrella printed with a laundry soap brand. "Hot banana fritters, still warm," she called out. "Crispy veggie spring rolls, 3 for $1. Noodles, great for dinner." Inside the cart, her goods were arranged neatly. On the right, fried snacks, banana fritters, caramelized bananas, and crispy rolls. On the left, noodles in a plastic container with free lemon and plastic forks. In a cooler, bottles of sweetgrass jelly drink floated in ice. A group of students bought some food. 3 construction workers came for noodles. "Whoa, you're still out here and you're pregnant," one said, smiling. "You should rest." Hannah smiled back, sweat pouring from her face. "It's fine, gotta keep going. That's how it is when you're on your own." Hours passed. Her food was nearly sold out. She stood there, fanning herself with a piece of cardboard, trying to ease the burn in her back. "Just a little more, baby," she whispered while caressing her belly. "We'll make up for this tomorrow." Suddenly, a screech pierced the street, a sharp, metallic wail of tires, then a loud crash. It was as if the air exploded. Everyone turned. A man in black had been thrown into the road. He hit a post and collapsed. His forehead bled. A luxury bag rolled from his hands. People rushed forward. "Someone got hit," one shouted. "A motorcycle ran into him. He's bleeding." Hannah froze. Everything slowed. Even the steam from her cart felt like a cloud of shock. Everyone was standing, watching. But she didn't hesitate. Even while pregnant, even trembling, she forced herself to walk to the center of the street. She didn't care that everyone was staring. Each step hurt. Her legs felt like jelly. But she didn't stop. She knelt beside him, looked down at his face. "Sir," she called softly. He was bleeding from his temple, pale, sharp nose, fair skin, wearing an expensive watch. But in that moment, he was just a man, a human being in pain. She took off her apron and pressed it to his head to stop the bleeding. "Don't close your eyes," she whispered. "I don't know who you are, but I won't leave you." "Someone call an ambulance," she screamed. "Please." No one answered. A tricycle passed by. She waved it down. "Sir, it's an emergency. Please take us to the hospital. I don't know him, but he needs help." The driver nodded. "Hop in." Hannah nearly carried the man into the sidecar. He was heavy, but somehow, through adrenaline or compassion, she managed to lift him in. She climbed in, drenched in sweat, cramping in pain, but never letting go. At the ER of the public hospital, nurses rushed over. "Code red, road accident victim," one said. "I don't have his ID," Hannah explained. "I don't know anything about him. I'm not even sure he's from our area." She added, "I don't have any money. But please help him. I don't know him, but I couldn't just let him die." The staff exchanged looks, surprised. A pregnant vendor, soaked in blood, shaking but unwavering. A nurse helped her sit. The man was wheeled inside. Hannah slumped in the waiting area, gasping. Her hand gripped her belly, still feeling the baby's kicks. "You're strong, dear," an elderly woman beside her whispered. "Not everyone would do what you just did." Hannah smiled faintly, though she couldn't find words. Minutes passed. The ER was silent. She couldn't stop replaying the accident in her mind, the blood, the man's face. It seemed familiar, yet not. "No connection to my life," she told herself. She looked at her blood-stained palm. Then a commotion erupted outside. Security guards came rushing in. Nurses ran to the entrance. "What's going on?" an intern asked. Outside, 8 black limousines lined up in front of the ER. One after another, shiny, massive, and tinted. Doors opened. 20 bodyguards in black suits emerged, all with earpieces. Their eyes scanned the area like hawks guarding royalty. Patients buzzed with questions. "Is it a celebrity, a politician, the Prime Minister?" Hannah stood frozen, hand on her belly. Slowly, she got to her feet. "What is this? A movie?" a nurse beside her whispered. "Who did you bring in?" Hannah's voice trembled. "I don't know. He had no wallet, no ID. He just collapsed in front of my cart." From the lead limousine, an older man stepped out. He wore a sharp suit, carried a cane despite the heat, and had an icy stare. With one glance, you'd know he wasn't ordinary. He looked around, and then his voice shattered the silence. "Where is my grandson?" he roared. The air turned cold. Hannah turned to the ER, to the man she had brought in, to the blood still on her hand, and in that moment, she knew her day was far from over. Hannah remained seated quietly at the edge of the emergency room. She barely moved, staring at the wall for almost 30 minutes, trying to calm her heart and thoughts. She kept replaying the events, the accident, the bleeding man, the 8 limousines, the 20 bodyguards, and most of all, the older man who had arrived like a king and shouted, "Where is my grandson?" She looked again toward the ER, where the man she brought in was being treated. Someone had asked who he was, but to this day she still didn't know. All she knew was that he was hurt, and she was the only one who moved when everyone else just watched. Hannah stood up, supporting her belly with one hand. She gently adjusted her duster, soaked in sweat, throat dry, and body trembling. "I'll just go home," she thought. "I need to rest. I've done all I can." She began walking down the hospital hallway, but before she could exit, a nurse called after her. Miss, hold on." She turned around but kept walking. "Yes, I'm the one who brought him in, but I'm leaving now. He's okay, right?" "Just a moment," the nurse said, catching up. "We need to check you too." Hannah looked annoyed. "Huh? Me? I'm not hurt. I'm fine." "But Mom, you're pregnant and we noticed you were trembling earlier. We need to make sure you and your baby are okay." "I don't have any money," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm really fine. I'll just go home, I promise." But before she could take 3 steps, she suddenly gripped the wall. Pain. A sharp stabbing pain from her lower abdomen. She gasped and stopped breathing momentarily. The nurse reacted quickly. She called out to another nurse and a doctor. "Miss, wait, sit down, please. This could be preterm labor. We need to check." The staff almost had to drag her back. She resisted crying, bit her lip, and held her belly, feeling it tighten. In a small exam room, she was laid on a bed. The doctor examined her. "Stress-induced contractions," the doctor said after a while. "She's not going into labor yet, but if this continues, it could become dangerous. She needs rest, bed rest." "I really don't have money, Doc," Hannah said, trying to sit up. "If possible, I'll just go home and rest. I can't afford this." "If you go home now," the doctor replied, "there's a chance things could get worse. It's not just you in danger, your baby is too." Hannah sighed, closed her eyes, overwhelmed with worry, hunger, and exhaustion. Just then, the door opened. "Apologies, Don Julio." The nurses looked up and bowed slightly, like royalty had entered the room. Hannah looked up as well, startled. There stood the elderly man with the cane and commanding presence, Don Julio, the same man shouting earlier. He stepped closer. "Is this the woman?" he asked the nurse. "Yes, sir. She's the one who brought him in." Hannah was confused, swallowing nervously. Don Julio nodded, then approached Hannah, and unexpectedly bowed slightly. "Thank you, dear," he said, voice low but steady. "You're the one who helped my grandson, Julian." Hannah struggled to speak. I helped someone in an accident, but I didn't know who he was." Don Julio smiled softly, though tears welled in his eyes. He placed a hand gently on Hannah's shoulder. "I thank God there are people like you in this world. You didn't know him, but you helped. You brought him here. If not for you, I might have lost my grandson." Hannah lowered her gaze. She didn't know what to say. Then Don Julio noticed her stomach. "Oh, you're pregnant," he said in surprise. "And you still carried my grandson?" Hannah tried to smile. "No one else helped. I had to. I couldn't just ignore him." For a few seconds, silence settled. Then Don Julio spoke again. "I want to help you." Hannah looked up, startled. "Help me?" she asked. "Yes," Don Julio repeated. "I'm sure my grandson would want to help you too, once he wakes up." The nurses exchanged glances. Hannah looked overwhelmed. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, especially not from someone who looked like they belonged to another world. But Don Julio, sir," she stammered. "I have nothing to pay you. I can't afford anything." He shook his head. I'm not asking for payment. Not everything in life needs to come with a price. Hannah went silent. Then she gathered the courage to speak. If ever you want to repay me for what I did, you don't have to. What matters is your grandson is alive. Don Julio nodded slowly, a soft smile on his face. If you'd like, once you give birth and recover, you could come work for us as a helper. I don't mean this as a debt to repay, but as an opportunity. The nurses were visibly surprised. Hannah looked down at her hands, rough, still faintly stained with oil, tired. As a helper? In your home? She asked, barely believing it. He nodded and pulled out his phone from his coat pocket. Rosa, he said over the line, prepare a room in the main house. Send a nurse and make sure we have everything needed for a pregnant woman. As soon as possible, he turned back to Hannah. When you're ready, I want you to stay at the mansion, until you give birth, until you're strong. And if you agree, I'd like my grandson to have someone with him in the house while he's in a coma. Maybe when he wakes up, you'll be the first face he sees. Tears streamed down Hannah's face, not from fear, but from the mix of confusion, nervousness, and unexpected kindness. Why me? She asked quietly. You don't even know me. Don Julio stepped closer, smiling gently. I can see you have a good heart. You don't need connections or wealth. Sometimes a single act of compassion is enough to convince me that this isn't all just coincidence. He left Hannah with the nurse and one of the household's caretakers. As he walked away, Hannah finally took a deep breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out her worn coin purse. Inside were a few crumpled dollars and a receipt for cooking oil. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know what awaited her at the Asiero estate. But one thing was clear. Her life's direction had just changed. 2 days after the strange event at the hospital, Hannah decided to accept Don Julio's invitation, not out of ambition but necessity. The baby in her womb was safe according to the doctor, but she needed bed rest, no sales, no cart, no income. And in their small unit in the crowded neighborhood, the noise from trains, cars, and mixed exhaust fumes often felt louder than the heartbeat of the baby inside her. Now, here she stood in front of a wide black gate, facing a mansion so grand it looked like something out of an old movie. She'd thought places like this only existed in stories, but this was real. The marble driveway was bigger than their entire neighborhood hall. The gardens looked like wedding bouquets. The 3-story ivory mansion shimmered with golden trims at every window. It didn't feel real. A man in a black suit with an earpiece opened the gate. He looked like a bodyguard from the movies. Good morning, Ma'am Hannah. Don Julio is expecting you, he said with a nod. Let me help you with your things. Oh, it's just this, Hannah replied shyly, handing over her old backpack with a torn zipper and a plastic bag of snacks Miss Terry had packed. Inside, a warm wooden scent mixed with that of luxury candles. The ceiling had a chandelier that looked like clouds made of crystal. Each step echoed on the floor, a sign of how vast the space was. My God, she whispered, it's like a cathedral. At the far end of the grand living room sat Don Julio, reading a newspaper on a throne-like chair. Ah, Hannah, he greeted. How was the trip, my dear? I sent Ramon to pick you up, didn't I? Yes, sir, she replied nervously, adjusting the hem of her dress. I'm actually a little embarrassed. You've been so kind. Don Julio smiled gently and gestured to the couch across from him. Please sit. I won't let you stand too long. You're pregnant. Don't worry. You're safe here. And so it began. Days passed, and slowly, Hannah adjusted to her new life. No more waking at 3 a.m. to buy ingredients. No dust, no sunburn. Each day the maids gave her milk and fruit and let her rest in her own air-conditioned room with a soft bed. But she couldn't just laze around, so every afternoon she sat on the second-floor veranda, mending her old blouses or folding clean laundry. A sewing kit and a plastic basin of newly dried clothes sat beside her. "Hannah, what are you doing?" Don Julio asked once while passing by the veranda. She was startled and quickly hid her thread. "Oh, sorry, I can't stay still, so I'm mending my clothes." Don Julio shook his head with a gentle smile. "You have nothing to be ashamed of here. I want you to keep your rhythm." Despite his age and power, Don Julio was not just generous, he was respectful. Whenever he had coffee, he would invite Hannah to sit with him. They didn't talk much, but on some days he would ask about her life at the market, her cart, and the simplest things. It was as if he was truly interested in Hannah's world, in her simple life. "Hannah," he said once while they snacked together, "do you know that even I don't recognize half the people in my own house? But you bring light. When you're around, silence becomes sound. I'm sure you and my grandson will get along." She didn't answer. She didn't know what to say, but she smiled the rest of the afternoon. A week passed, and she still hadn't seen the man she had saved. According to the house staff, he had already been discharged from the hospital, but was on strict bed rest by doctor's orders. No visitors were allowed into his room, except the nurse and Don Julio. "He must be someone really important," Hannah said one day to the kitchen maid. "That's true," the maid replied. "Sir Julian, he's the sole heir to everything here. He's already the CEO, ever since his father passed. Very quiet but smart, brave and incredibly handsome. I saw him once when he visited. Oh my, like a movie star." "Oh," Hannah replied flatly, trying to hide her expression. The truth was, her curiosity was growing. Who really was this man she had found bleeding in the street? What was his true place in her life? On a quiet Wednesday night, the mansion was still. Most of the lights were out. Hannah couldn't sleep. Rain fell outside. Thunder rolled as she sat on the veranda, reflecting on how her life had changed so suddenly, from the streets to this mansion, from selling banana rolls to sleeping in a room with her own bathroom. She heard soft footsteps, not slippers, but bare footsteps on marble. She turned. A shadow approached down the hallway, slow and quiet. Hannah stood up, hand on her belly, heart racing. "Who's there?" she asked softly. No reply. The figure stepped into the chandelier's glow, and there they met, eye to eye. Julian, tall, dressed in a white shirt, one arm in a sling, face slightly pale. Yet even in his frailty, he stood firm, as if used to pain, as if unfamiliar with strangers. Hannah gripped the veranda rail. Her eyes widened. "It's him," she thought, "the bleeding man, the one I saved, and the one from that night." But Julian's eyes showed no recognition. He stared at Hannah like a stranger, perhaps tired, annoyed, or surprised. He didn't seem to know who she was. "Who are you?" Julian asked coldly. Hannah didn't answer. She froze where she stood, eyes locked with his. Both frowned, both confused. "Who are you?" A question that hurt more than expected. It wasn't just cold, it was a blade slicing through her chest, reminding her of all she'd hidden. She wanted to say, "I'm the girl from the club. The girl who was with you that night, the one carrying your child now." But she couldn't. Maybe it was shame, maybe fear, or maybe it was the strange, piercing pain of not being recognized. After that night, Hannah and Julian didn't see each other again. He stayed in his room. The routine returned, quiet mornings and quiet nights. Hannah remembered something. While cleaning out an old bag, she found the ID she'd been meaning to return, but she never knew how. Now it was clear. Julian Asiero. The photo, the name, the face. "What is this?" she whispered, holding the ID. "I'm such a fool. How did I not realize it was him? How did I not guess I had entered his family's home?" She touched her belly. she felt the baby stir. There was no one else in the room, just her and the truth. "Baby," she whispered, "don't worry. Even if I don't tell him, it's okay. Even if it's just me, I'll manage. I can be your mom and dad." She slipped the ID back into her old bag, a secret that would remain a secret. Weeks passed, and the days became a routine again. Waking up, folding laundry, sewing old clothes. From time to time, Hannah would chat with Don Julio, who seemed to grow more fond of her. Once, while they drank coffee on the veranda, he said, "When you give birth, Hannah, I want you to stay. You're not just a guest anymore. You're part of this household." Hannah smiled. "Thank you, Don Julio." But behind that smile hid sorrow, secrets, and memories. Every night before sleep, Hannah's mind returned to that night. The loud, crowded club, the flashing lights, the scent of alcohol, Julian, dressed in black, with sharp eyes. In the morning, she woke up in a hotel bed, covered only by a blanket. Julian was asleep, his back turned. She couldn't remember everything, but the fragments were enough. And from there, everything began. A few days before her due date, her back pain worsened. Her belly tightened more often. Still, Hannah wasn't used to being idle. Despite the luxury, she still preferred to be busy, folding, sewing, rinsing. One morning, nearly everyone in the mansion was gone. There was an event elsewhere. Don Julio had left for a meeting. It was 11 a.m. The sun was blazing. Hannah was walking down the hallway to get a drink from the kitchen when suddenly pain gripped her belly. She screamed, "This can't be it! Not yet! Ah!" But in the next second, it felt like two hands had struck her hips. Hard, heavy, painful. She sat down against the wall, panting, heart racing. "Baby, please, hold on." She tried to stand. She spotted a telephone across the hall and began walking. 1 step, 2, 3. Her vision blurred as she reached for the phone. "Help, please." "Hannah?" A familiar voice. She turned. Julian, still wearing a white shirt, slightly pale, but alert. He stood several feet away, and in that moment there was no anger in his face, no confusion, only fear. "Hannah, what's happening?" "My baby, I think I'm going into labor." She couldn't finish. She collapsed. Footsteps. Strong arms caught her. Warmth as he pressed her against his chest. Then running, her name being shouted. "Hannah, wake up! Rosa! Did someone call the ambulance? Hannah, I've got you. I won't leave you." That was the last thing she heard. Then came the light, a white ceiling, the smell of alcohol, the beeping of monitors, and the cry of a newborn baby. Slowly, Hannah opened her eyes. Beside her, a nurse smiled. "Congratulations, Mom. It's a baby boy. He's healthy. He's in the nursery now." Tears filled Hannah's eyes. She didn't know if it was from exhaustion or overwhelming joy. "How is he?" she asked weakly. "He's strong. Have you chosen a name?" Hannah smiled through her tears. "Asher," she whispered. "My son's name is Asher." The next day, Don Julio arrived at the hospital carrying massive bouquets and a stuffed toy bigger than the hospital bed. As he entered the room, "Hannah, congratulations." Hannah nodded, trying to sit, but the old man stopped her. "No need, dear God. It's like an angel has arrived in this world." "That's my great-grandchild," he continued proudly. "The baby of the woman who saved my grandson, raised under my roof. You're part of this family now, and he's such a handsome little boy." Hannah could only laugh quietly, wiping her tears. When they returned to the mansion, something in the air had changed. Julian was no longer the cold man he had once been. He became quiet, but always present. He was there in the nursery, always peeking in when Hannah breastfed, and though he rarely spoke, he often stared at the baby, as if seeing something deeper than what his eyes allowed. One night, Hannah found Julian sitting beside Asher's crib, quiet, just watching. "Hey," she greeted. Julian nodded silently. "You're still up?" "Yeah, the nerves are getting to me. First time, you know." Hannah chuckled. "You seem like a natural." "I don't even know how I managed to do all this," he replied softly. Silence followed. Then Julian finally spoke again. "Hannah." He said her name gently. "Thanks." Hannah looked at him. "For what?" Julian didn't answer. He just smiled faintly. But in his eyes there was something new. Trust, warmth, and something deeper she couldn't yet name. And that was the beginning of the change Hannah had long been waiting for. The mansion was quiet, except for the soft giggle of a baby from the nursery. Weeks had passed since Asher was born, and with each day the atmosphere shifted, especially with Julian. He was no longer locked away in his room. He was often in the hallways, the nursery, even the kitchen, once just standing by the fridge, holding Asher's milk. And the way he looked at Hannah, it was no longer distant. There was a search in his gaze, as though trying to understand something only she could answer. "Why are you always so quiet?" Hannah once asked, as they sat together on the veranda, rocking Asher to sleep. Julian looked at her for a second before glancing away. "Just thinking." "You're always like that," she teased, "like a puzzle I don't know whether to solve or run from." Julian turned to her again, but this time with a small smile. "And you're like a question I keep trying to answer." Sometimes, late at night, they would find themselves talking at length, from simple, "How was your day?" to long discussions about favorite food, movies, and music. Hannah was vibrant and full of color. Julian was reserved, but deep. "Why did you keep to yourself for so long?" she asked one day, while changing Asher's diaper. Julian sat nearby, watching. "I didn't choose it. That's just how I am. I'm used to being alone. It's easier when no one depends on you." "But doesn't it feel nice, knowing someone's there to lean on?" Hannah asked, rocking Asher gently on her shoulder. "It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're human." Julian stayed silent, then finally nodded. "Maybe." One day, they walked together through the garden. Hannah carried Asher in a baby carrier, like a mother leading a school field trip. Julian followed quietly, holding the baby bag. It looked amusing from a distance, but for Hannah, it was one of her happiest mornings at the mansion. "Do you want to know what Asher's first word will be?" she asked, smiling while pointing at flowers for the baby. "If his first word is Papa, I'll crawl the entire hallway on my knees," Julian joked. Hannah laughed. "Really? I hope he says it then. I'll record it." Julian grinned, a real one, not the formal smile of a rich man, but the genuine smile of a person. "You know, Julian," she said, as they sat beneath a tree, "I sometimes wonder, if you ever had a child, what kind of father would you be?" Julian looked at her. "I don't know," he replied, then glanced at Asher. "But for a kid like this, I think I'd do everything." Hannah looked down, unsure if she felt joy or pain, because she didn't know if Julian meant it the way she hoped, or simply as a man who happened to be in their lives. One night, as Julian handed her Asher's milk bottle, their hands accidentally touched, just for a second. But the world seemed to pause. "Sorry," they both said in unison, then laughed, but in that laugh was something else, not yet love, but perhaps the start. While Hannah rocked Asher to sleep in the nursery, Julian walked in quietly. In his hands was a small toy, a stuffed dinosaur. "I bought this earlier at the mall," he said. "I didn't know if it was okay." Hannah smiled. "He'll love it. Thank you." Julian nodded. "I want to be around him." Hannah paused. "Why?" "I don't know," he answered, looking down at the crib. "But when I'm with both of you, it feels like something that was missing is becoming whole again." Hannah didn't know how to reply. Instead, she moved closer, and they stood side by side, watching Asher sleep. In the silence, a question lingered in her mind. How would she ever tell him the truth? That Asher was his son? But she didn't ask. Not tonight. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the mansion's windows, a convoy of cars arrived. Luxury vehicles, one after another. The household staff rushed out in anticipation. Hannah, from upstairs, holding Asher, saw it all. She heard Don Julio's voice from below. "Ah, Valeria, dear!" Hannah turned to look just as Julian stiffened beside her. "She's here," he muttered. "Who?" Hannah asked, sensing the tension in his voice. Julian didn't answer. He went downstairs. Valeria Acosta entered, the supermodel from the US. Tall, long, straight hair, a graceful neck, and a sculpted figure. Her voice echoed through the living room, sweet but full of confidence. "Julian, baby, I missed you," she cried, hugging him and waving to Don Julio. From the nursery upstairs, Hannah stood like a statue. She looked out the window, holding Asher, barely able to breathe. That night, Julian didn't return to the nursery. He didn't appear before Hannah. And for the first time in weeks, she cried again. Quiet tears, without sound. Lying beside her son, holding his little hand, her tears fell silently on her cheeks. "It's okay," she whispered. "I was never part of his world anyway, right?" The next day, as Hannah walked the hallway toward the nursery, she overheard a conversation. "Julian, I didn't come here just to visit," said Valeria. "We should get married before the year ends." Hannah froze behind the door. She held her chest tightly. Julian's voice was low. "Valeria, a lot happened while you were away." "What?" Valeria laughed. "That maid? Don't tell me you have feelings for her. She's basically your age." Hannah didn't hear what he said next. She couldn't take it. She left, her steps heavy. Hannah picked him up and hugged him tight. "Mummy's right here," she whispered. But inside, she no longer knew how long she could keep hiding everything, especially now that the woman who truly belonged in Julian's world had returned. Hannah's steps were heavy as she walked down the long hallway of the mansion. With every step came a rush of feelings she'd been trying to suppress. Pain, longing, and a farewell she never thought she'd have to make. Like the days before, Asher rested against her chest, fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the weight of his mother's decision. Weeks had passed since Valeria's arrival. Since then, Hannah felt Julian slipping back into the world he truly belonged to, a world of wealth, promises, and people who shared his status, a world where she didn't belong. She wasn't a model, she wasn't rich, and most of all, she wasn't Valeria. Each day, Hannah chose to stay out of sight. She avoided the hallways when Julian was around. She skipped dinner when he joined. She stopped catching his eyes. Because now that his fiancée was back, there was no more space for Hannah. No more place for her in the mansion, and certainly none in Julian's heart. One afternoon on the veranda, Hannah sat beside Don Julio, rocking Asher in her arms. He noticed her quiet demeanor and the heaviness in her words. "Don Julio," she said gently, "thank you for everything. If it weren't for you, I don't know how I would have survived." Don Julio's forehead wrinkled. "Why do you sound like you're saying goodbye?" Hannah didn't respond right away, but her resolve was clear. "We're going back to the province," she said. "Asher's father and I, we've reconciled. We want to start fresh. We'll be moving there." Don Julio turned to her, surprised. "Are you sure about this?" Hannah nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry if this is sudden." He fell silent, clearly concerned, but in her eyes he saw the same strength he'd seen the first day they met. Strong, determined, a mother willing to sacrifice anything for her child. "If that's your decision," he said finally, "I won't stop you, but Hannah, know this. You and Asher will always have a place to come back to." She didn't answer. She simply hugged the old man. The next day, Hannah chose a time when Julian would be away. She knew he had a meeting scheduled at one of the family's real estate developments. She had planned this carefully. Quietly, she descended the stairs, carrying her worn-out backpack and a bag of Asher's clothes. No jewelry, no luxury. Just a simple woman, a simple mother, a housemaid who happened to love a man she shouldn't have. She left one final embrace with Don Julio, a last glance at the room she had shared with her son, and a deep sigh in the hallway where her eyes had once met Julian's. When Julian returned around 1 p.m., the first thing he did was rush to the nursery. He wanted to see Asher, he wanted to see Hannah, but the crib was empty. No mattress, no diapers, no toys, nothing remained. He ran downstairs. "Grandpa, where's Hannah? Where's Asher?" Don Julio remained quiet. "They left, Julian." Julian froze. "What do you mean they left? Why?" "She said she got back together with the baby's father. They're moving to the province." Julian's world fell apart. "She didn't explain. She didn't even talk to me." Don Julio shook his head. Julian stood silently, but inside him, chaos, a whirlwind he couldn't explain. "Why does this hurt so much?" "Julian, are you even listening?" Valeria's voice cut sharply through the quiet as they stood in front of a prestigious wedding boutique in Manila. "Sorry," Julian answered coldly. "What did you say?" "You've been so distracted ever since I arrived," Valeria snapped. "What's going on with you? This wedding is 2 months away. You should be more involved." "I am," Julian replied, though even he could feel how little he meant it. Every time Valeria tried on a gown, he thought of Hannah's simple dress. Every flower arrangement reminded him of the dried blossoms Hannah had pinned above Asher's crib. In every laugh, in every plan, something was missing. And every night, he quietly opened his phone's gallery. There was Asher's photo, the green eyes, that little smile. "Why do you feel so important to me?" he would whisper into the dark. Meanwhile, in a small barangay in Quezon Province, Hannah began building a new life for herself and Asher. She sold rice cakes again, sewed rugs, offered laundry services to nearby households. It was exhausting, but every time she looked at Asher, she knew she had made the right choice. Back in the city, Valeria's prenup shoot was in full planning mode, yet Julian couldn't shake his lack of enthusiasm. He had people quietly look into Hannah's whereabouts. One of his assistants finally came back with something. "Sir, it appears there's no man who returned to Miss Hannah's life," the assistant reported. "They're new to the village, no records of a previous address. There's no truth to what she said about the father of the baby returning." Julian felt the world drop from under him, like being splashed with cold water. The day of the wedding came. The church was packed with socialites, media, and elite families. The Julian Asiero Valeria Acosta wedding. The union of empire and beauty. Dressed in an ivory barong, Julian stood at the altar, his heart pounded, not with joy, but with turmoil. He looked around, so many people, but someone was missing. He kept hoping she would appear, even when he had no right to hope. As everyone waited for the ceremony to begin, a man with an earpiece approached Julian. "Sir," he whispered urgently. "Emergency. Baby Asher is in the hospital. Seizures. Critical condition." The world spun. "Asher!" Julian didn't wait. He looked at Don Julio in the front pew and shook his head. Valeria had just begun walking down the aisle. "I'm very sorry," Julian said, voice trembling. Gasps echoed through the church. Without waiting for a reply, he stepped down from the altar and ran out of the church. The media shouted his name. Valeria nearly fainted mid-aisle, but Julian heard none of it. Only one thing mattered. He needed to get to Hannah and Asher. Meanwhile, in a small hospital in Quezon, Hannah struggled to breathe as she watched her son, connected to IV tubes, still shaking. His hands trembled, his color faded. The fever triggered a mild seizure, the doctor said. I don't have money, Hannah pleaded, trying not to cry. Please just give him the medicine, run the tests, I'll find a way to pay. We're doing everything we can, the doctor replied. But the labs and meds require payment. Hannah nearly passed out from the stress and guilt. I can do this, she told herself. I can do this alone, right? Suddenly, the nurse rushed in. Ma'am, everything's been paid. Someone just covered all expenses, including a DNA test for the baby. What? Hannah blinked. DNA test? Before she could ask more, the door swung open, and there he stood, the man she never thought she'd see at that moment, Julian, still wearing his wedding barong, wrinkled, sweaty, his eyes red from exhaustion. The first thing he did was walk straight to the crib. He gently touched Asher's forehead. Hey, he whispered. You okay now, little guy? Hannah couldn't speak. She stood silently in the corner, gripping her worn-out bag, hands trembling. Why are you here? She asked faintly. Julian didn't look at her. His focus was on Asher. I know the truth, he said. There was no man who came back. You left because you didn't want to ruin my life. Hannah stayed quiet. Julian turned to her, and for the first time, all his emotions, concern, anger, shock, and realization, shone in his eyes. Why didn't you answer me when I asked if I was Asher's father? He asked. The room fell silent, but inside Hannah, it felt like drums were pounding. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the faint breath of a sleeping child. Hannah stood still, unsure if she was supposed to speak or cry. Julian waited. His chest rose and fell unevenly as he stood near Asher's crib, his hand gently resting on the child's tiny foot. Hannah, he repeated, softer now. Why didn't you tell me the truth? She didn't know how to explain the months of silence. How do you wrap pain, fear, shame, and love into one sentence? I didn't want to cause problems, she whispered. Problems? Julian echoed. That's what you think he is? No, she said quickly, shaking her head, stepping forward. Asher is my life, my miracle. I didn't want you to feel obligated. You had your world. You were about to get married. And I didn't love her, he cut in. Hannah froze. Julian stepped closer. I was going to marry Valeria because it made sense. It was what everyone expected, but I never loved her. I don't think I ever even tried to. He looked down at Asher again, then back at Hannah. But you, he swallowed, you came into my life when I didn't even know I needed you. And him, he brought me back to life. Tears streamed down Hannah's face. But you were angry when we met again, she said. You didn't even recognize me. I didn't remember, he admitted. That night, the club, the drinks. I blacked out. I woke up not knowing what happened, and I spent months feeling like something had gone missing. He looked her straight in the eyes. Now I know what I lost. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I had a DNA test done yesterday. I had the lab rush it. He handed her the envelope. She didn't need to open it. She knew what it said, but Julian did. He unfolded it, held it out, and pointed to the line. Father, Julian Emmanuel Asiero. Hannah stared at the words, her knees weakening. She had always known it, but now it was real, on paper, unchangeable. Julian stepped forward again, voice softer than she'd ever heard. Hannah, let me be his father. Her lips trembled. I don't need anything from you, she said. But I need him, Julian replied. And I need you. Hannah shook her head. I'm just a vendor. a single mom. I have nothing to offer." "You gave me back my life," he interrupted. "You gave me my son. You gave me something no money could buy. You're everything I didn't know I was missing." She cried harder, trying to look away, but Julian gently reached for her hand. "I love him," he said, eyes locked on hers. "And I'm falling for you." The weight of those words hit her like a wave. After months of fear and hiding, it felt like she could finally breathe. "But what about your wedding?" she asked. "I left her at the altar," Julian said. "I walked away from everything, for you, for him." He stepped closer, and Hannah didn't back away. "I'm not asking for a perfect life," he whispered. "I just want a real one, with both of you." Asher stirred in the crib, his eyes fluttered open. Julian leaned down and whispered, "Hey, buddy, Daddy's here." The baby smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the man he somehow already recognized. Hannah covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. At last, she looked at Julian and answered the question she had avoided for so long. "Yes," she whispered, "you're his father, and I think I've loved you longer than I realized." Julian pulled her into a gentle embrace, not the passionate kind from movies, but the kind that healed, the kind that promised something real, a new beginning, a family at last. 6 months later, the Asiero mansion was no longer just a symbol of wealth and power. It had become a home, filled with the laughter of a baby, the smell of morning pancakes, and the sound of love spoken in the smallest gestures. Julian and Hannah weren't in a hurry to marry. They knew love didn't need a deadline. They chose to build it slowly, day by day, with Asher as their bond. Every morning, Julian would lift Asher high into the air, making airplane sounds. "Captain Asher, ready for takeoff!" And every morning, the baby would giggle with uncontainable joy. Don Julio, once a man hardened by loss and empire, now spent afternoons lying on the floor, letting Asher crawl all over his stomach. "This kid will take over the company someday," he'd joke, while Hannah fed him sweet rice balls she'd made from scratch. Valeria never returned. She left quietly, without a scandal, without noise. She knew when to walk away. She had always lived in the spotlight. She didn't need to chase someone else's. And Hannah? She began designing again. Small baby clothes at first. Miss Terry had mailed her old sewing kit, and Julian had it mounted in a glass case as a reminder. "You carried us with this," he said. Eventually, they opened a small boutique near the estate, a fusion of simplicity and class. Little Miracles was the name, each piece sewn with the same love Hannah had for Asher. One Sunday morning, as they sat on the grass, Julian reached into his shirt pocket. Inside was a ring. "Hannah," he said nervously, "I know we've built this family backward. Baby first, love second, marriage last. But if you'd still want it, will you marry me?" She didn't speak, she just cried, then nodded, and the three of them embraced, Asher between them, giggling, not knowing he had brought together a love story that began in the most unexpected place. Not every beginning is perfect. Some are messy, some are painful, some start with a single mistake, but with love, courage, and truth, they can still find their way home. And Hannah, Julian, and Asher, they finally did.